Hi, I'm Tim Newton, joined today by Dan Henkle, who is the president of the Gap Foundation and the senior vice president of global sustainability for the Gap. Dan, first of all, welcome back to campus, a Purdue graduate, but those are big titles to put on a small business card. You have a lot of hats that you wear.
Yes, and I tell people it's one of the advantages of staying with the company for 24 years. I've been able to do a lot of fun things and managing a lot of really interesting work.
Before we talk about your work at the Gap, it all started here at Purdue. You're from the Midwest, though, originally,
I am.
right?
I'm from Wisconsin. Yeah,
Came down to Purdue to get your undergraduate degree,
that's right.
and then back out to get an MBA at the Cal Berkeley School.
Yeah, House
correct?
School of
Yep,
Business.
yep.
Yeah.
Now, in between, before you went to the Gap, you had a corporate responsibility or corporate connection at Oracle. Talk about that and how you went from there then to the Gap.
Sure. So we had Oracle's chief financial officer at the time was a Purdue grad. It's kind of an interesting story. For the most part, Oracle was hiring Ivy League kids. So we had a little batch of Purdue grads and then a huge batch of Ivy League kids because our chief financial officer was from Purdue. And he just really was, he was determined to bring as many, accountants and finance folks into Oracle as he could bring in, and that's how I ended up at Oracle.
So what then drew you to the Gap? Why did you decide to go the retail route?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was at Oracle for 4.5 years, which doesn't sound like a lot of time. At Oracle, it's kind of interesting, I did a little search. After 4.5 years, I had been at the company for longer than 95% of the workforce. And so it was just, at the time, one of those companies that people didn't stick around for very long, and particularly in high tech, a lot of movement and so on and so forth. Long story short is Gap called out of the blue. One of the recruiters called and basically said, we're interested in some of the work you've been doing at Oracle. Do you want to come talk to us? And at the time, interestingly, my entire wardrobe was Gap. And so
It was
like,
fake.
yeah, exactly. How cool is this? I can actually go and work for the company and get a 50% discount, and just the idea of actually moving from high tech into apparel and retail was really interesting to me. And the reason I've stayed for 24 years is that it is a culture that is much more aligned with sort of who I am and my values.
Let's talk a little bit about those buckets that you oversee, and let's start with the global sustainability, because you've really got two things that you're trying to protect. You're trying to protect the earth, and you're also helping try to protect the people who produce your clothing.
That's right. Yeah, and so on the global sustainability side, really we're looking at human rights and environmental rights and standards as well. And so part of in a supply chain, and these supply chains, as you know, are very complex. So we produce in over 1,000 factories every year. And so it's one thing to have control over your own workforce. So we have 135,000 Gap Inc. employees. We have over 1 million workers in our supply chain. And so basically, now you're one step removed, and you're basically saying, how do we ensure that these working standards are up to par? And so you're working every day to make sure that they're super clear on what our expectations are, and then sharing best practice and helping and building capability to just have better working conditions over time. So that's a huge, huge part of what my team does. And I have a field-based team. And we believe in hiring locally so that people understand the cultures, can speak the language, and we just feel like they have greater impact that way. And then we have a very significant amount of effort going towards the environment. And we've set some recent public goals that are pretty ambitious. We're endeavoring to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 50% over the next 5 years. We've set a very ambitious waste goal. We have an ambitious goal around hazardous chemicals. So one of the things I love about that work is it's not work that a little team in the center can drive for the entire company. It really takes the entire company doing their part to actually make a difference. And the other thing I would just add is that it's work that it's not only good for the environment, but it's good for the company's bottom line as well.
We talk all the time here at Crandard about cultural intelligence and understanding the cultures, and you talked about the fact that you have a million people who are producing things or in the global supply chain. You have individual customs and traits for a particular country, but there are overall standards, I assume, that the Gap says you must be able to do this. We'll be able to adapt a little bit to you, but you must be able to do this.
Absolutely. So we have what we call our code of vendor conduct, which is sort of the baseline that we have to see, and then you're going to look at country laws as well, and oftentimes our code of vendor conduct is more stringent than those country laws. Sometimes the country laws are actually quite stringent, so we're always going to be looking at compliance with country law and compliance with our code of vendor conduct. And so if a law is not there, for example, I'll give you a good example is discrimination. So what if there's not a law around discrimination based on sexual orientation? That's part of our vendor code of conduct. We're going to monitor against that as well. So there are certain standards we're going to hold across no matter where we're operating.
All right, let's take that hat off, put the other hat on with the Gap Foundation. What are some of the kinds of things that the Gap Foundation supports?
So there are two big focus areas: women in the developing world and youth in the communities in which we have our store operations. And I'm going to explain why we have the focus areas in those two areas. Gap, so if I look at our own workforce, we're 74% female. And interestingly, 73% of our store managers are female, 75% of our senior leadership team is female. So very consistent, right? When you go into the supply chain, you see a workforce that's about 80% female, so that's consistent with Gap Inc. But then you go and look at management, and you see almost no women in management positions. And so we said, what could we do to change that? And so we put a program in place called PACE. It stands for Personal Advancement, Career Enhancement. It's a really comprehensive education and learning program to try to address this over time. And we've been operating the program for about 10 years and have just seen extraordinary results. And one of the things we say is that these women don't lack ambition, but sometimes they lack opportunity. And so if you can put the opportunity in front of them, they're going to seize it. And that's what we've been seeing with that program. So we just committed at the Clinton Global Initiative in September to expand the program. So 35,000 women have gone through the program to date. Within the next 5 years, we'd like to see 1 million women go through the program. So that is something that is a big deal for us. The second thing on youth in our supply chain, or in communities where we have our stores. So first of all, our workforce is quite young. Our customer base is quite young. And so, again, it makes sense for us to be focused on youth. And the issue of youth unemployment is a huge, huge issue, not just in the United States, but all over the world. And so we focus on low-income youth that are having a hard time getting their first job. We provide job readiness, and then we provide jobs in our stores. And I love this program. It's a program called This Way Ahead because it connects these kids to their first job. And then our stores actually participate in all the volunteering that goes into the classes that we do for these kids, the coaching, the mentoring. And a lot of our employees say that they get more out of this than the kids themselves because they can see the difference that this program makes.
Mentioned at the very beginning that you were a Purdue graduate. What did you learn or what did you take away from Purdue that helped you to get ahead at Oracle and now at the Gap?
Sure. What's interesting is I pretty quickly transitioned out of finance. So I graduated with an accounting and management degree. So even though I didn't do finance for very long, just 14 months, I had transitioned into human resources. And to be a human resources professional with really a business mindset and a mind for numbers and stats and and talking a good game has been a tremendous advantage. And quite frankly, it's been an advantage to me, not only in human resources, but also in my work in sustainability as well. And part of what allows us to move work forward in the GAP Foundation and in global sustainability is always a good business case. Are you actually going to make a difference? Are you going to have good social or environmental outcomes? But what's the impact on business as well? And what we have found is the things that actually can do both, like good outcomes on the social or environmental side and good business outcomes, those are the programs that tend to be sustained in the long term. And I think companies are realizing that more and more. So the stronger the business case, the more opportunity you get to scale your program and the more opportunity you get to make a difference.
You mentioned when you started at the Gap, most of your clothing was from the Gap.
Yes.
24 years later, what's the closet look like now?
It is 100%, I mean, almost 100% our brands. So the fortunate thing is we've got multiple brands. I'm probably have graduated a little bit to our Banana Republic brand. I would say probably more so than Gap right now. But we get a 50% discount, which applies to the family as well. And because I've been with the company so long, when I retire from the company, I'll have a lifetime discount. So my prediction is my closet will look very similar for the rest of my life.
He sells it and he lives it. Dan, welcome back. Thanks
All
for
right.
coming back and talking to our
Thank you.
students.
Thank you.
For Dan Henkle, I'm Tim Newton.